hot, not too cold.
Okay, so we're at the end of our study of John's epistles. We're going to cover Third John today, and we covered Second John last week. If anybody missed it, I highly recommend you go and watch that video or listen to the audio. It's all recorded and posted on sermonaudio.com. But Second and Third John are very short epistles, and really just for that reason, they rarely get a lot of attention. But if we have a view of Scripture that God has superintended not only the writing of certain books and epistles, but their collection into the canon that we now call our Bible. These books, Second and Third John, had to be put there for a reason. I think if they were entirely duplicative of other books in the New Testament, I don't think they'd be there. The fact that they're there tells me there's something there for us, something unique in Second and Third John. And what we're going to see, if you think about Second John, he had a real central exhortation that doesn't sit well in the American church, which is another reason the book isn't taught, or when it is taught, it's taught wrongly. And that is his statement that when you have people who he describes as antichrist, they're out teaching very destructive false doctrines that undermine core Christianity. He says to show them no hospitality, and that's in the sense of how the first century understood and practiced hospitality. It was just a cultural norm of allowing people to stay in your home and to provide them food and shelter, and maybe even send them on their way with provisions. But then John goes further and says, don't even greet them. Like he wants to make it clear that there are people that are teaching such destructive doctrine that you're to have no part, no fellowship with them, no part of supporting their ministry in any way, and that just doesn't sit well. Well, in Third John, he's going to deal with almost the opposite, which is showing hospitality toward Christian missionaries that are traveling, that are carrying the gospel forward. And in that way, Second and Third John fit together. I think a lot of times that gets missed, but you'll see it here, and I'll share the screen. It's not a hard epistle, but it's another one that says things that again a lot of modern churches don't want to hear, but we need to hear it, and it makes a lot of sense, and it shows how Second and Third John hang together in this way because of they're both dealing with hospitality. Now, I title this Reputation Matters because I think one of the central themes of Third John is that your reputation as a faithful Christian, meaning a Christian who walks in faithfulness to God's word, it matters. It's important because some people would say, well, it doesn't really matter. Well, I think it does. And so I list some reasons why study Third John, a book that's very, very short. It's just some 15 verses. We find a very personal letter. For one, this letter is addressed to an individual. We see this in some other writings in the New Testament. It seems like Luke addresses an individual with his gospel in the book of Acts. We don't know who that Theophilus is, but he addresses an individual. And of course, Paul writes a letter to Philemon. It's that small epistle we have at the end of Paul's writings that is also a rich epistle that deserves attention for the uniqueness that it brings to our New Testament doctrine. But this is written in a very personal way to Gaius, who had a good reputation. And I've heard many people, Christians and non-Christians, will say, I don't care what other people think about me. You ought to. Because if you have a bad reputation because you're a jerk, and a lot of Christians do, or you're a hypocrite, you ought to care. Because if a pagan can spot you as a jerk and a hypocrite and someone who's abrasive and unloving, um, that matters, and it's a bad testimony. And so, if you have a bad reputation because you stand for the truth, that's a whole different thing. And both of those are possibilities. Sometimes people get a bad reputation for doing what's right, and But what we don't want to do is be that person that uses this "I don't care what other people think about me" as a cover, because we're just simply not doing what God expects of us, and other people respond to us negatively for that reason. Now, even as I said, even lost people can spot a hypocrite, but this epistle recognized a phenomenon that anyone I think who's been in local churches a while has witnessed. In my notes that I've distributed previously, I call this usurpers. Like there's usurpers in the local church. We're going to see an example of one, but they're the people who think they're in charge of everything, or they're going to manipulate events to be in charge. And I'm not talking about the pastor. It usually isn't the pastor, although even a pastor can make him or herself out and as if they can be manipulative and controlling in a way that there's no New Testament authority for. And we can talk about that in a while, because that's obviously a real problem. But there are usurpers who step within a church, and they manage in a very political sort of way to control the church to its harm, and often other people do nothing about it for a host of reasons, and we'll talk about that. So there's a usurper, and these usurpers drive away godly people from a local church, and but because so many local churches actually have some usurpers or people who want to be usurpers, they're trying to position themselves. This epistle sometimes doesn't, people don't want to hear it. I'll have a high level outline here. It said, I put 14 there. That's an error in the number four. There's really 15 verses here. But in any event, John greets this man, Gaius. Gaius is the individual, and John seems to know him. He writes a very personal letter to him. He spends several verses commending the reputation of Gaius. And this tells us that a good Christian reputation, a reputation for showing the qualities that we should see in Christians, what we might, say in short, by the phrase, fruit of the Spirit. Those people who walk faithfully, what we might call the real McCoy, that matters. And Gaius has that reputation, not only within his own church, but even others have talked about him in this positive way. There's also a guy named Diotrephes, I call him the usurper, who has a bad reputation. So we see this obvious contrast in the book. And there's a third person, I don't mention the outline, named Demetrius. And when you really boil it down, John's writing a letter to Gaius to ask him to show hospitality to Demetrius when he arrives in whatever city they're in. But this guy Diotrephes, he won't have it. He not only won't show hospitality, he won't allow anybody else to do so either, because it is a challenge, he thinks, to his power. So, with that just intro in mind, let's get started. Much like Second John, here we don't read John identify himself. There's really little doubt he wrote it. The book has the language and content similar to First John and John's Gospel, but he calls himself the elder, and we saw that this word elder can be used in what we might call a technical sense, and it is several times in the New Testament. A lot of us are a part of or have been a part of churches that have someone called a pastor, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a Bible term, but it's not a common Bible term. It's more common in the New Testament to see elder. There are those who would say that those are different things. I tend to think they are functional descriptions. A pastor is a functional description, in my view, of something an elder does in leading the flock. But in any event, the elder is often used in that technical sense of a church office or a church leader, but it can also just mean an elderly person. And it's the word presbyteros. It's where you get the name of the denomination Presbyterian comes from this. But John, I think must have been probably in fact was old by the time Second and Third John were written, and probably First John. And I think he ministered to a number of churches and was well known, and they may likely have just called him the elder, and he may have called himself the elder. And they knew who that was is probably the case. He writes to his dear friend Gaius. That word dear friend is agapetos, which we saw several times in First John. It was a common expression that would seem to indicate a personal relationship with Gaius, right? Otherwise, he wouldn't call him dearly loved. I don't think in this way. The King James says well beloved. It's both a commendation probably of Gaius's character, but also an indication of this relationship. And John adds that I love Gaius in the truth. And you remember in First John and again in Second John you can't divorce love from truth. Not in the Bible sense of this word love. And we've talked a lot about that in the past. This agape love is an action, but love gets so confused nowadays because it's not viewed in the way agape love is. I say an action. It's an attitude that usually issues an action, but it tries to do what's best from a Bible perspective for the other person. Sometimes that's saying no and so forth. But that love is grounded in the truth. You can't detach this agape love from the truth of Scripture, from the truth that Jesus revealed about God. And so he loves him in the truth. And it's that's kind of a packed statement. We may infer about this Gaius as we continue to read because he's noted for his hospitality. Hospitality costs money. If you were an impoverished Christian, you might be able to give somebody a roof over their head for a night, but you might be hard pressed to send them on with some money and food. But Gaius is known for his hospitality, so he may be well off. It would seem that's a possibility. Um, um, oops, I went the wrong way. uh, John writes about his prayer life. We may think a lot about Paul's prayers because the epistles Paul writes, they're full of prayers. I sat down one time and tried to identify all of them. There's at least a couple of dozen, maybe more, places where Paul talks about his prayer life. He indicates what he prays for. And that's a good study because Paul doesn't pray he seems to have a focus in his prayers that may differ from what we're used to hearing in like public prayer in church. So it's a good study. Here's a place where we get a little insight into John's prayer life, and just a little nugget here in Third John. And he prays that his friend Gaius is prospering in every way and in good health. So certainly it's appropriate that we would pray over people's health, right? I mean, here's John saying he does it. And then he adds, just as your whole life is going well, I think he's saying that I pray that you're prospering in every way. And I think he's praying, that sort of that your whole life would be going well. I don't think that's a hard verse to understand, but I wanted to point out that where it says whole life, that's two words in English, but it's one word in Greek. It's the word that we usually see translated as either life or soul. And it's the word psyche. When you combine psyche with the word logos, which means the word, like Jesus is the word, psyche and logos together, that's where we get psychology. The study of the soul is what it means, even though most psychologists don't believe you have a soul. But I mention this because English readers tend to think of soul as just the immaterial part of us that goes to heaven. And as I'll argue when we get into Book of James, and I've covered some of this in the past, that is not the predominant usage of the word soul, and it's the reason that so often, as it is here, soul is translated as life. There are some instances where soul seems to have a very comprehensive concept of the immaterial part of us, but most often it is our life. It's not the mere fact that you're alive, but there again, there are some instances where it's used in a fairly limited way. like that, but the most often usage is the substance of your life, the things you do and experience, the things you say. And so when he says, your whole life's going well, we understand that perfectly well. We know what it means for life to be going well. If we were asked, how is life treating you, we would understand. But when we answer that question, that life's going good, this or that happened, and, we may measure it in different ways. But when we talk about life going good, we're really talking about our soul. We're living beings, but we have a day-to-day experience that can be positive or negative depending on a whole lot of things. And that day-to-day experience is also can be described as soul. And so when the Bible speaks of saving the soul, we have to wrestle with what that means. Is it merely saving a physical life, like you're on death row, and at the last minute, the governor saved your soul by issuing an order of clemency or whatever, or is it something else? Well, we'll deal with that in James, but I wanted to mention it here because it's such an obvious place when you read this verse. It's clear that your soul is not your spirit. It's not the part of you that will spend eternity in heaven in that sense that we often think about it when we talk about being soul winners. An expression that well, anyway, so just as your whole life is going well, that's the idea. Let me pause there. We haven't gotten far, but any thoughts or comments, questions? Hey, Dan.
Saving the soul, that could mean that, or I'm asking rather, could that mean that the things you do in this life um, have an eternal weight to them? And so you could say saving in the sense that you're saving money in the bank. The 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 things you do well, somehow they translate over into the next life.
Yeah. That's what I'm going to argue in James. Saving a life could mean um, what we would normally think of, like somebody falls in the pool that can't swim and somebody jumps in and gets them out of the water and they've saved their life. There is another Greek word for life, by the way, that's often translated life, and it's the word zoe. So this is it's an interpretive issue as much as it is a translation issue, but you'll find in most translations, including the King James, that they will in places use the word soul, and other places use life. And to an English reader, this can create some confusion because I think in English, as with some other words like repent, we've given the terms English definitions for English usage that may not be inherent in the Greek term. And so we'll spend time on it, but you can certainly see that soul, if it can mean in some context the idea of the immaterial part of you that goes to heaven or the spirit or something like that, it clearly does not here. And just noting that this is a good example where soul doesn't have that sense just puts us on notice that when we come across this word of scripture, we really have to wrestle with it. And in my experience, that gets missed a lot, and people uh, just sort of assume it's a certain way that it may not be. Judd?
Yeah, there's actually a third word for life in Greek, bios, where we get
Mhm.
biology. So
Yeah.
you have zoe, where we get zoology, bios, where we get biology, and psyche, where we get psychology. So it's very important in Bible translation to realize that there are synonyms that have a semantic range that sometimes is common, and sometimes there's meanings between the different synonyms that
Hmm.
uh, are different shades, and it's just very important in Bible translation. And uh, he, that one is very difficult because it can, as you brought out, mean many different things. And in some verses, right, the one is that in James saves his soul from death.
Yeah, in James
Yeah.
1:21, I think is the verse.
Yeah, it's very important because if you translate it incorrectly, you can come up with false doctrines. So that's
Yeah.
where your art and science of hermeneutics, Bible translation is extremely important. And Mrs. Whitten has something too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that when you're doing this verse, it always, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, and that's what it says right before saying, don't bring them into your house.
Hmm.
To know the difference between truth and error, to know whether it's a satanic plan. There's so many satanic counterfeits that the Bible commands us. What does it, Proverbs say? Buy truth and sell it not. Proverbs
Yes.
23. And you
Yeah.
can't know the truth, the Bible doctrine, if you're not studying it. And there are
Mhm.
so many deceptions, astrology, just constant deceptions coming out at us. And the Bible tells us what to do and what not to go near.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And if we put second and third John together, which I really want to emphasize, because when you put them together, you really see like God has something very special for us here. He's telling us in third John to be people of hospitality. He's telling us in second John, there's some people that you aren't to show hospitality to. And then the question is, how do I know when? And that's what you're getting at, and I love that there's in fact, I've got a sermon on my website. It's not me preaching. It's my old preacher, Dan's old preacher. He had a whole sermon called "Buy the Truth and Sell It Not" about kind of this issue of how important it is. But if we don't know our Bibles, we're not going to be in a position to know when we should be showing this hospitality and when we may have to withhold it. I mean, it's scary, and then of course we're in a culture like you mentioned, like the devil's sort of at work here. He's convinced a whole lot of people that the truth isn't all that important, and after all, who can know the truth, right? He sounds like something Pontius Pilate would say, "What is truth?" And but we can know the truth, and we're fixing to see that here in Third John. He's going to do what he does in all his epistles. He never divorces the concept of loving other people, being a loving person, from being grounded in the truth. You need both of those at the same time, or there's going to be a distortion in sort of how you're living this stuff out. So, and Judd's comments are really helpful, and we need to really think about that as we deal with some of these verses because this is where your own personal theological bias can work its way into even how some of this stuff gets translated sometimes, and we all have biases, so they're there. And our antidote to that is to be, first of all, open first and foremost to whatever God has for us, even if it means we have to change our mind about something. But we need to be good students of the Word that are looking at context and stuff because I think these issues aren't usually as hard as they get made out to be. If we simply spend real time in context of a book, they'll work their way out for us. But we'll see that when we get to James. But this is just a good example, an undeniable verse where this word that sometimes is translated as soul and then maybe not understood correctly clearly has the idea of Gaius's experience of life that it would go well. Now we have Gaius's reputation. As I said before, reputation matters. In fact, one of the letters in the book of Revelation is to a church that has a name, as it gets described. And there's some concern raised in that letter about that issue because having a name, okay, in the Bible, the name often indicates your character, your reputation. That matters, and this matters. It's a very personal letter. This is the letter we'd all like to get from John. He says, "I was glad when fellow believers came and testified." So John is writing from another church. He'll make that clear a little later. And Christians have come to the church where he's at, traveling Christians, the kind of people who might need some hospitality, and they have testified about Gaius. And I think in particular, they've shared that Gaius showed them hospitality when they were there. They've came and testified to your fidelity to the truth. You see how it starts with that before it even gets to the part about his showing hospitality, how you are walking in truth. Remember, in Second John, he wrote to the elect lady an expression for a local church, and he was so pleased that some of her children, the members of that church, had a reputation for walking in the truth. He had heard, become aware that some of her children were walking in the truth. This is what all Christians are supposed to do. It's not what all Christians in fact do. The fact that John describes it as walking in the truth is so telling to what Winnie was mentioning earlier. Like we're supposed to be in the book, and I know some people kind of convince themselves, oh, it's too hard or whatever. Uh, it's really not. I mean, if we'll get into the book, God will help us work through it and understand it. He wants us to know this information so that we can make it how we live. We can walk in it. And this guy Gaius is not only doing it, but it's obviously observable to other people because they've experienced it. They've seen it in him. They may have been the recipients of his love through showing hospitality. And as somebody who's a minister of God's word, John says, I have no greater joy than this to hear that my children are walking in truth. Um, this verse is a verse that often gets sort of just quoted out of context to be talking about our biological children, although that would be an application. All of us want our biological children or grandchildren to walk in truth. John here has in mind those he's ministered to, and he considers them his children, as he did in First John, and it gives him a great joy to know they're walking in truth. And I think anybody that's engaged in not just ministry in a vocational sense, just you're teaching other people in a group, you're teaching somebody one-on-one, you're trying to work with them through the gospel or through, some discipleship. And it's a source of great joy to see these people grow, to see other people walk in truth. And that's how John feels. And if this quality, if somebody doesn't have this quality that they take great joy in seeing other people walk in truth, um, that's not the person you want in a leadership role in a church. Okay? And we're going to meet somebody here in a moment that doesn't have that quality. I've been around a lot of Christians that are in leadership roles that don't have that quality. I've been around a lot of them that wouldn't know the truth if they stepped on it and tripped. But there can be other motives, and the Apostle Paul would call out some of those motives in some of his writings, and and that's a shame. But just you can see it here. This is what somebody who is doing ministry and cares about those he's ministering to. This is the way he thinks. He has great joy. She has great joy in seeing those that they're ministering to walk in truth. So Gaius is the proverbial real McCoy, as I say. I think a lot of people today are rightly concerned that there's maybe too many folks that are Christians who don't seem to be growing. They're not taking this sanctification process seriously. And it is a problem. I don't know if it's a new problem. I think in a lot of ways it's always been around, though for different reasons. There was a time when most Christians didn't have access to the scriptures. They were written in a language they couldn't read. They were dependent on other people to tell them what was said. And there have been times when 90% of a population was illiterate. And again, they had to depend on other people to share what's in the Bible with them. That doesn't mean that those people couldn't learn. A lot of times they did, but they had some reason for maybe not maturing as fast as they might otherwise do. In this country, Bibles are not only readily available but inexpensive, and if someone couldn't afford it, there's groups out there like Gideon's who are giving them away right and left for no cost at all. So we really don't have an excuse for not getting into the Word, and knowing the truth. It's a real concern. But we also don't want to be too cynical about it and think that no one is doing it. I think a lot of people who are deep in the Word, the only way you're going to know that is to talk to them, to have a real deep conversation with them. We shouldn't assume from anything else other than really having engaged people in a conversation about the Bible as to what they know or studying. I suppose if their conduct's bad enough, you can't say they don't know the word. You can just say they're not doing it. They're not walking in truth. But here's Gaius, and he's the real McCoy, and he's just a reminder. And even now, even with an American church that's got a lot of problems in general, there are still a lot of people who really believe the word, and they will get into it and study it. I wish I could say that's the norm. I don't think that is the norm. But Gaius was that proverbial real McCoy. He knew the truth. You can't walk in the truth if you don't know it. He knew the truth and he walked in it. It's how his life was conducted. And so he's, like I say, he's the real McCoy, and that's a good thing. Um, it's always been valuable to me personally to know some older believers than me, and especially when I was, much younger, and older just meant somebody that might have been in their 50s. Now for me, I'm thinking older is since I'm in my 50s, older has to be older than that. But to know some older believers who I recognize and experience that they do walk in the truth and that they've done so for a long time. It's a testimony to me that it can be done, because there's a lot of folks who I've been around who've just messed it up so badly and for so long, and often in very public ways, as a pastor who's finally outed for a long time affair or whatever. It's been very valuable, and I think it was valuable to John, and probably meant a lot to others that Gaius walked this way. So John confirms his reputation. Judd, did you have a hand up? Or it might have just been up from earlier. If if you're muted if you're talking, just so you know. Okay. So yeah, so he confirms Gaius' reputation. Now let's see uh what's next here. He says, "For I was very glad, John was glad, when fellow believers um, came and testified to your fidelity to the truth, how you're walking in truth." And this is where again we get that he's got a reputation that is such that I mean, we all know what gossip is. This isn't gossip. This is commendation. Uh, that's coming to John, that this guy Gaius is the real McCoy. He's walking in truth. And he's just, I think like we might say in modern language, this guy's just on fire for God, and he's doing all these great things. And, you know, uh, John says, I have no greater joy than this. Here, my children are walking in truth. So we make God's character, including his love, visible when we do this, so that these other believers could see it. Now, these fellow believers that came and testified, right? They came to John's church from Gaius's church, right? From, Gaius doesn't seem to be the pastor, but where he attended. And the point is, they're traveling Christians. They're the kind of people that probably are two things, because John's going to say it in a moment. They're probably missionaries, and they probably spent time in Gaius's home and received his hospitality. Dan?
Yeah, that verse 4, I have no greater joy than this to hear that my children are walking in the truth. That verse has a very timeless quality to it.
Hmm.
It's almost as if God were speaking.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a great verse, and as I said, it's it's not about biological children, but it does have that application if we raise our children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, to use the old King James words for it from Ephesians. We should take great joy as they transition into adulthood to see them walking in the truth, right? And of course, as we minister to other people, it's it shows how important that this transformation process, maturing process is. Like it's the forefront of John's thinking. So he says to Gaius, okay, now he's heard probably from traveling missionaries about Gaius, dear friend. This is that word agapetos again that he just used earlier. Dear friend or dearly beloved, well beloved, that kind of thing. You are acting faithfully in whatever you do for the brethren. Okay, it's translated brothers and sisters here, the brethren, especially when there are strangers. This could also be translated. There's a textual issue that some manuscripts say the strangers, and so you get a translation like brothers and sisters, like, including strangers or something like that. But I think you get the idea. He says, especially when they're strangers. In other words, it's traveling Christians, I think, is what he's talking about, some of whom he knows, perhaps by reputation or personally, and some who are complete strangers to him. They just show up at his door, probably because they've heard his reputation, and they're the strangers. Some folks take the strangers to be lost people. I don't think that's the indication here. And it just doesn't fit the rest of what he has to say. I think the idea, and you pick it up in verse 6, they, the people you've shown hospitality to, have testified to your love before the church. Well, those strangers who are lost people didn't go to John's church to give testimony about Gaius. These are traveling missionaries, traveling Christians that John has shown hospitality to, even if he didn't know them. And you might say, well, how do you know they were missionaries? Look at verse 7. Since they set out for the sake of the name, it's not to say that Christians couldn't travel for another reason and find hospitality among fellow Christians, but these Christians set out for the sake of the name. I love how it says it. These people are preaching Jesus Christ and accepting nothing from pagans. So, Gaius shows hospitality to people he knows and doesn't, and they're missionaries. It's right that he would do that. This happens sometimes today. It's not as common just because, we have hotels and the missionaries may have money, or like at a church I was a part of, sometimes if we knew a traveling missionary was coming through, we would pay for their hotel. So it's not the same as having them in your home. But I've also seen a number of instances where Christians have opened their home to traveling missionaries. I had gotten the chance to go to somebody's home and meet a missionary that was staying there. I just remember now, even though it was 10 years ago, and I was so impressed with this young lady that had went to be a missionary in a part of Africa, she was a registered nurse and working in a hospital there that provided not free health care, but very low price health care, and they would preach the gospel to people. And when she was stateside, this person had opened the home to her. She didn't have to pay for a hotel or food or anything. And it's a wonderful gesture. It is loving, and it is the kind of hospitality that John is praising in Gaius to do this. And notice that last phrase, accepting nothing from pagans. Does that mean that if a pagan just somebody that's not a Christian, if a non-Christian offered or wanted to make a donation to a local church, they want to write a check for $100,000, should we accept the check or send them away? Any thoughts?
According to this, send them away.
Well, maybe. I've heard it. I mean, I'll say I don't take that view, but I've heard that view a lot, and it's from this verse.
because this seems to be to me like um a statement of faith, maybe like you're
Mm.
going out in faith and you're expecting God to provide your needs. Is
Yes.
that the idea here?
I think so. I think the expectation is that people that are believers, that God will provide for their needs through other believers. You know, there are places where the Apostle Paul, in sort of defending his apostleship, would talk about the fact that when he was among, I think it was the Corinthians, but I may be misremembering, but basically he took nothing from them. He basically was what we would call today bivocationally, and he either already had his own resources or he did some work um, to make his own, make his own wages, to buy his own food and such, so that he took nothing from them. There certainly could be instances where, taking money uh, could call, it gives people a reason to talk, basically, a reason to criticize. And John stopped short of saying you couldn't take anything from pagans, but they didn't. And I think it's just what you said. It kind of indicates that looking for God to provide through his people. Um,
Yeah, one time I was in the car with Bob Simpson,
hmm?
and we were driving somewhere, and there was some person on the intersection. It was some kind of church group, like asking for donations, and he made a comment, and this maybe this is where he got this idea, but he said,
Hmm?
if these people were doing the Lord's work, why are they out here begging everybody for money? And
Yeah.
that always stuck in my mind, and I wondered, okay, where did he get that from?
Yeah.
Maybe he
Well,
got it from here.
no, probably so. And I tend to agree with them. I've seen that and been a little surprised. Now that said, let me be very careful here. I can remember an occasion where a youth group was raising money that way for some youth trip, right? And I'm happy to give to that. I think I did, but it was a little concerning that they kind of did it like standing on a corner, in that way, because I kind of expect God's people to pay for God's mission trips. I could be wrong in that. I will say I've seen instances where somebody that's not a part of a church and may not even be a Christian, for one reason or another, felt like they should provide some gift or some money, not looking for anything in return. I mean, they might hear that, a church, opened its doors to some flooding victims or something, and so they, write a check. I don't know that that's a problem, but like I say, I'm not dogmatic about it. I just open it for discussion. Everybody had a thought, but I think this is one of the places where people would get the idea that we shouldn't accept any funding from people sort of outside the faith. So, well, uh, Gaius's hospitality. God's actions were relayed to the church where John is. They have testified. I love that. The idea, of course, is it's right and good for Gaius not only to house traveling missionaries, but look what he did. He says, "You do well," verse 6, "to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God." You're seeing these missionaries as they're on a mission from God. I mean, they're set out for the sake of the name, and so the idea is real simple. It's to, within your means, show them the hospitality of not only having a roof over their head, but send them away with a bag of food, maybe even with some money, but you send them away to help them safely arrive at their next destination. And when you do that, he'll say in a moment, you are participating in the gospel ministry. Paul would talk about how people partnered with him and participated in his missionary journeys by giving of their substance. Not everybody could go on the journey, but it's a way we can participate in their work. So here's the big therefore in Third John. So far we know that Gaius is a shining example of a Christian that walks in truth. There's no indication that he's the pastor or any of that. It seems unlikely because of what we'll see in a moment. He's just a member of the church that he walks in truth between Sundays and does what he's supposed to do. And he's built that reputation so much that people in other cities know about it, other churches. So that's good. He says, therefore, here's his exhortation, and this is what I call the therefore, I probably should call it the exhortation. We ought to support such people so that we can be co-workers with the truth. That's the kind of for us. Gaius is the great example. Co-workers here could be fellow workers. It's an adjective, but it's the word that we get the English word synergy. It's synergos, but we get the English word synergy in this co-workers. The idea that they're working together. Um, I support a missionary couple that have a ministry at a state university in Texas, a couple hours away from me. They are on the campus all the time. They're meeting with students, developing. They're evangelizing. They're developing discipleship groups. They're starting to teach college age people the scriptures. We all hear about all the bad things, how, the far left have owned the universities for a long time, and that's true. There's also Christians there doing some good work. I can't be there on that campus doing that, but I can provide some monthly support, and it's a small way for me to work together with them as fellow workers. And by the way, I highly recommend that. Hopefully, would be in a church where the church is doing this for missionaries, and you can give, missions money. Maybe you say, okay, I want to give $100 a month that is going out directly to support those missionaries. It's a way of participating in their ministry. You can also find a missionary on your own and make sure you look at their doctrine, look at what their work is, and come alongside them financially. Even a small amount makes a big difference. Missionaries typically are struggling to have enough work, especially if they're they're going overseas and their full-time job is planting churches or something. They're often in need of support. So anyhow, Gaius is the example. And when we do this kind of support, which could be showing hospitality, having people under our own roof, could be some other, financial thing. And of course, it goes without saying, if you're praying for those people specifically, you're also participating, I think, in their missionary endeavor. But we can do this. And so it's a big therefore, because not all Christians do this. And as we're going to see, there's one clown in this church who won't even allow it. So the therefore kind of sets up the theological principle. It's right to support missionaries. That's really what he's saying. And when you do that, you're a co-worker. You're a fellow worker, a fellow helper with them. So John said, or he says, I wrote something to the church, verse 9. When he says I wrote something, he means a letter. He didn't have an email or a text message. John sent a letter, and if I could paraphrase, the guy that answers the mail in the church threw it out. That's basically what happened. Diotrephes, this is the guy you don't want to be, who loves to have the first place among them. I call him a usurper, a Diotrephes. In that local church, he wants to have a place of preeminence. That is what motivates him. That should never be a motivation for somebody to be in vocational ministry. Um, and Diotrephes does not receive our authority. This guy got a letter from the Apostle John and doesn't accept John's authority. It's a shocking thing to see. Second John is about sometimes you got to withhold hospitality, but this is about somebody that's withholding hospitality when it should be shown. And in particular, the idea is he's not going to show hospitality that John requested for a man we're going to meet in a moment, named Demetrius. So in verse 10, this is why if I come, and he's going to say later he's coming. Uh, Paul had to do that with Corinth. He said, you don't really want me to come because heads are going to roll. You're going to see the power of the Spirit. Uh, but if I have to, I'm going to come. And John basically says, I'm coming. I have to wonder what kind of reception the elder received when he showed up, but I suspect that Diotrephes was very unhappy when that happened. In any event, this is why if I come, I will remind him of the works he's doing. Now think about that. John's going to call him out. And it seems he not only doesn't, respect John's authority, he's slandering us. See that in verse 10? This guy, Diotrephes, is slandering the author of the book of Revelation, the author of the fourth gospel, the one that sat right next to Jesus at the Last Supper, slandering us with malicious words. He's not satisfied with that. In other words, it's not good enough for him that he rejects John. He not only refuses fellow believers to welcome fellow believers. Now he's talking about hospitality. This man won't show hospitality like Gaius, and he's exerting his influence to stop those who want to show hospitality. He's even expelling them from the church. I can't imagine a more serious deficiency in a local church than to have a Diotrephes. But if you've been around church long enough, you've met Diotrephes maybe more than once. And so this is a real thing. And I call him a usurper because God has granted authority in his church and spelled out how that authority works. Diotrephes is not working within that authority at all. And he's doing the opposite, of course, of what any elder should be doing by preventing other people from showing the kind of love and hospitality that Gaius does. Obviously, Gaius is just continuing to do the right thing. That's why John's writing to him. But here's my question. Why does this happen? How does this happen in a local church where they would be in such a bad place that somebody in some sort of influential role could reject the very authority of the apostles and manipulate other people in the church so that they cannot show hospitality to traveling Christian missionaries? How do you get that far down the wrong path?
It's got to be doctrinal issues somewhere. There's lies being propagated, and so if this little mini pope here is telling people, for example, that if you don't listen to me, maybe you're not going to heaven when you die. If
Mhm.
some kind of mess like that, and it keeps people in fear.
Mhm.
That's what I think it is.
Yeah, you see the slandering us, so clearly lies are a part of it. Um, but what kind of people allow someone in a role of an influential role or a pastor, who allows that person to slander the apostle?
Maybe they benefit from it in some way. I don't.
And think about that. I'd mentioned several weeks ago about because it was like on national news, like this pastor, I will use that term loosely, standing up in a church and calling out John the Baptist as a bigot. Um, and I'm thinking, okay, but what's up with all those people sitting there, sort of in the amen row, Judd?
Yeah, I think that all it is this is how I see it.
Hmm?
People that are functioning outside of God's plan and not following what the royal family honor code that we were taught is God in Second Timothy 2:16. God describes them as useless and worthless. Such
Mm.
believers are
Hmm.
identified. Avoid, and then there's all those things. Second Timothy 3, 2 through 8. People will be lovers of themselves. Some people will do anything for attention. Lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive,
Hmm.
disobedient, ungrateful, unholy, without loving. If you're if a believer is functioning outside of the plan of God, it's very hard to even distinguish them from an unbeliever. And
Yeah,
some people are sitting in the pews 40 years and have learned nothing. It's like flabbergasting.
right.
So,
No, that's right. But and then somebody's got to stand up. And clearly Gaius, under whatever threats or manipulations happening, Gaius is still doing the right thing. And that's where a lot of the problem comes in. You get someone like this, and I've experienced this firsthand, the pastor does the right thing and kicks them out of the church, and then some other people start getting upset about it, you know? And that's one of the biggest, I say the biggest problems here with usurpers is we got an abundance of useful idiots that let it happen. They won't do anything or don't even know better. And so John says, don't be a Diotrephes calling out a church member, presumably a Christian, is evil. He's calling them out. I mean, this guy may or may not be a Christian. We don't told, but he calls him evil. He says, friends, don't imitate what's evil. No, like he's pointing at this man. Don't be like Diotrephes, but do what's good. Well, doing what's good means you actually have to do something. So if we allow this person to continue to wreak havoc in a church because we think that's the loving thing to do, we have our we have no understanding of Scripture at that point. We're just everything is just turned around backwards. The one who does good is of God. Now, that doesn't mean that's the talisman of whether you're a Christian. But if you have God as your influence, if the new nature is in the driver's seat, you're going to do good. This person, the very fact of their conduct, he says that they don't have that close intimacy with God in the sense of having seen God, and that you can be around Jesus Christ and yet not realize He revealed the Father, as according to what He told Philip. So everyone in verse 12, it kind of comes out of left field. Everyone speaks well of Demetrius. Like, well, who's he? Even the truth itself speaks well of Demetrius. Why? This is what it looks like to be a good, faithful Christian, that other people will speak well of you because you'll have that reputation around, especially Christians, but you may have a good reputation even around people who aren't Christian. They see something in you that's genuine, even if they don't agree with you. And so he has this good reputation, but even the truth as revealed by Jesus Christ, as revealed in the Word of God, testifies to Demetrius. Now, who is he? This is clearly one of these missionaries, and this is why Paul or John is writing. He knows that church isn't going to take care of him when he comes through town, so he's asking Gaius to take care, I think, of Demetrius. So he says, we also speak well of him. John says, look, everybody speaks well of Demetrius. We speak well of Demetrius, and you, Gaius, know our testimony is true. And so the idea is picking up on that wherefore from earlier. He's expecting Gaius to take care of him. And so it's just a wonderful statement that, like Gaius, Demetrius has this reputation for truth. And I think this verse is really, verse 12 gets to his ultimate purpose. It's a letter of commendation to Demetrius that hopefully gets to Gaius before Demetrius gets into town, so that Demetrius will open his door to him. The epistle ends, I have many things to write to you. I wish he had written all of them, but he says, but I'm not going to put them with pen and ink because I'm hoping to see you soon, to talk to you face to face. You imagine this. Gaius gets a letter that, John's coming to see him, and no doubt he's going to go to that church, I think, and straighten out, Diotrephes. Peace to you. The friends send you greetings. I love that. Send you greetings. Greet the friends by name. He's just, sending greetings to the people at the church where they're at. So how do we respond to those, who are a Diotrephes? How to respond to those who criticize those persons who deal with the Diotrephes as unloving? I think it's kind of what we covered earlier. There's an idea in the Bible, in the New Testament, of sometimes of having to show church discipline, having to deal with somebody that becomes a cancer in the church. And there's a number of ways they can do this, but there often are people, and I've seen a lot of people lose their pastorate because somehow they took on a pastorate not knowing that there was a Diotrephes that runs the church, a wicked person that for whatever reason has been given de jure authority in a church, so that person is even holds a place over any elder or pastor. Happens all the time, and is a sad thing. So those people need to be dealt with church discipline, which may include exclusion of fellowship, but it requires a group of people who are walking in the truth. If you have a bunch of babies, they're not going to do it, right? And they're going to think it's a bad thing to do it. But in fact, the most loving thing you can do sometimes is to have to remove somebody like that for the purpose of the health of the church and the reputation of the church. Well, next week we'll move on to James. Be reminded that you can go on Amazon or through this link I've put, and you can get a copy of the Kindle version for free if you want of my notes on James. And I'll try to post a PDF if you don't have Kindle app or something and you want a PDF. I'll try to post that next week. But that's where we're moving to, Book of James. I'd encourage you to read ahead. I think of James as one of the most misunderstood easy books in the New Testament. We'll see why when we get there. But it's a book that's been made difficult, and like all these other ones, when things are misunderstood, sometimes they lose their power. The Book of James is a rich book. It's very practically oriented, and we'll see that it's all nuts and bolts stuff that we can immediately put into action, and so that's going to be a good study. With that said, I hope you have a good day tomorrow in church and a good rest of the week.